My sister slapped me in front of 200 people at her wedding. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. My name is Emily Carter, I'm 27 years old, and last weekend I stood in the middle of a wedding reception with a red handprint burning on my cheek. It wasn't a stranger who hit me. It wasn't an angry guest. It was my older sister, Sarah Carter, the bride herself, standing in her perfect white gown with her veil pinned neatly to her hair. And she did it in front of almost 200 people who had come to celebrate what was supposed to be the happiest day of her life. The music had just faded, the champagne glasses were clinking, and the dance floor was full of people. Sarah had been glowing, walking hand in hand with Daniel, her new husband. I was standing near the family table, trying to smile even though all night I'd felt something heavy pressing on my chest. I kept replaying in my mind what I knew, something Sarah desperately wanted buried. I didn't plan to say anything. For weeks, I told myself it wasn't my place, that I should just let her live with her choices. But as Daniel gave his little speech, talking about honesty, about trust, about how Sarah was his safe place in a messy world, I felt sick. My heart pounded so hard I thought I might faint. I couldn't watch him pledge his life to her while knowing she had betrayed him. I don't even remember the exact words that came out of my mouth, only that they were louder than I meant them to be. Daniel deserves to know the truth, I said. The microphone screeched, people turned, and suddenly every eye was on me. Sarah's head snapped around like a whip. Her smile dropped. For 1 second her face was frozen in shock, and then she was storming toward me. She didn't hesitate. She didn't even say a word. Her hand came across my face so hard my ears rang. The sound of the slap cut through the room like thunder, followed by gasps and whispers. I stumbled back, my cheek burning, my eyes filling with tears. I'd always known Sarah had a temper, but I never thought she would humiliate me like that in front of an entire ballroom. I could see my mother standing stiff near the cake table, her hand clutched around her wine glass, her mouth open but no words coming out. My father's face turned red, not from anger but embarrassment. He looked away, shaking his head as if I had ruined everything. And Daniel, poor Daniel, stood frozen beside the DJ booth, his smile gone, his hand hovering in the air like he wanted to reach for Sarah, but wasn't sure if he should. The whispers started spreading instantly. Some people looked at me with pity, others with judgment. I could hear bits of it. Jealous sister, family drama, ruining the wedding. My throat tightened, and I wanted to scream that none of this was about jealousy, that I was only trying to protect him. But I couldn't speak. Tears blurred my vision as I backed away from the crowd. The lights seemed too bright, the music too loud even though it had stopped. Every step toward the exit felt like walking through mud. Nobody came after me. Nobody asked if I was okay. All I could feel was the sting on my face and the weight of 200 eyes pressing down on me. That was the night my sister slapped me in front of everyone she loved, and that was the moment I realized just how far she was willing to go to keep her secrets hidden. Growing up in our house, it was always clear who the favorite was. Sarah could do no wrong in my parents' eyes, while I was the quiet one expected to go along with whatever she wanted. If she broke a rule, they brushed it off as harmless fun. If I slipped up, even in the smallest way, it was treated like a serious offense. I learned early that being her sister meant living in her shadow. She was clever, but not in a kind way. She knew how to twist things so that people believed her version of events. If I won something at school or got recognized for my work, she would find a way to downplay it or act like it bothered her. I can still remember the look on her face the first time I brought home a trophy. Her smile never reached her eyes. By the next day, she had turned the spotlight back to herself, and I was made to feel guilty for enjoying my moment. Over time, I stopped trying to compete. It was easier to let her take the credit and keep the peace. Whenever she cut me down, I told myself it wasn't worth fighting. I thought avoiding conflict would make things better, but it only made her bolder. The more I stepped aside, the more she pushed forward, like she was entitled to everything. That same pattern showed up during the months leading up to the wedding. While other brides made a big deal of asking their sisters to be bridesmaids, Sarah didn't even bring it up. When she finally included me in a dress fitting, it was an afterthought, one text the night before, as if she was doing me a favor. Standing there, holding the edge of her gown while she admired herself in the mirror, I realized I wasn't part of her vision at all. I was a prop, someone she could call on when she needed something, then push aside again. I tried to shrug it off, but a heavy feeling settled in my chest. She wasn't just leaving me out, she was making sure I knew my place. Every little slight added up, and by the time the wedding arrived, I couldn't shake the sense that something ugly was waiting just beneath the surface. It was the same uneasiness I had felt my entire life around her, only sharper now, pressing in on me like a warning. I never set out to ruin her big day. I told myself over and over that it wasn't my business, that people have to make their own choices. But what I stumbled on made it impossible to stay quiet. Months before the wedding, I walked into something I was never supposed to see. Sarah's phone lit up on the counter while she was in the shower, and a string of messages popped up. At first, I thought they were harmless, but then I saw Daniel's best friend's name at the top of the screen. The words weren't casual, they were intimate: promises, memories, late-night meetings. My stomach dropped. I tried to tell myself I misunderstood, that maybe it was a bad joke or something I misread. But the following week, I saw her slipping into Michael's car late at night when she thought no one was around. They didn't look like just friends. The way she leaned into him, the way his hand brushed over hers, it was the kind of closeness that couldn't be explained away. That was the moment I knew the texts weren't a mistake. I gave her a chance to explain. One afternoon, I pulled her aside and told her I knew. I expected denial, maybe tears, maybe guilt. Instead, she laughed. Not nervously, not embarrassed. She laughed like I was a child making up stories. Then she leaned in close and told me if I ever breathed a word, I'd regret it. Her eyes were sharp, daring me to test her. I remember my hands shaking as she walked away, still smirking. For weeks, I carried it like a stone in my chest. Daniel was kind to me every time I saw him, treating me like family, asking about my work, listening when no one else did. And all the while, Sarah was smiling in his face, letting him plan a future built on lies. Every time I thought about standing at the wedding and pretending I didn't know, my stomach twisted. When the reception came, and he spoke so openly about trust and loyalty, the words burned. I couldn't sit there and watch him pledge himself to someone who had already betrayed him. The truth slipped out before I could stop it. My voice shook, but I said what needed to be said. Daniel deserves the truth. That was all it took. Sarah's eyes locked on mine, her face drained of color, and then she was moving fast, her hand raised high. The slap came sharp and sudden, silencing the room. I didn't fight back, I didn't even speak. My cheek burned, but what hurt more was knowing why she did it. Not because I lied, but because I told the one thing she never wanted anyone to hear. The moments after it happened felt like a blur, but the consequences stretched far beyond that ball. Some guests stared at me in disbelief, whispering to each other, as if they didn't know whether to be horrified or entertained. A few avoided eye contact altogether, their expressions tight, as though my words had poisoned the atmosphere. Then there were others, the ones who clung to Sarah's side, nodding along with her angry glare, acting like I had simply come to tear apart her celebration out of spite. It didn't take long for my parents to decide where they stood. My mother cornered me in the hallway, her voice low but sharp enough to cut. She accused me of being selfish, of choosing the worst possible moment to settle old scores. My father didn't shout, but the disappointment in his eyes was worse than anger. He told me I had embarrassed the family and that I owed Sarah an apology. I wanted to scream back that they were blind, but the words stuck in my throat. Daniel didn't defend me either, though I saw the way his jaw clenched and his shoulders stiffened. He looked like someone had pulled the rug out from under him, but still, he turned back to the altar when the music played again. The vows continued, shaky but spoken, and the rings were exchanged while the crowd clapped hesitantly. I stood off to the side, numb, watching a marriage cemented on a fault line. When the night ended, no one asked me to ride back with the family. My phone buzzed with messages from relatives scolding me, some harsher than others. Words like jealous, bitter, and attention seeker flashed across the screen until I shut it off. The people who had known me my whole life suddenly painted me as a villain, and the weight of that judgment pressed down like a stone on my chest. In the days that followed, the silence from my parents was louder than any words. Calls went unanswered, and when I finally showed up at their house, the door was closed to me. I realized quickly that Sarah had won the narrative. She told them her version, and they accepted it without question. To them, I was the reckless younger sister who couldn't stand to see her succeed. It broke something inside me. I had spoken up because I couldn't bear to watch Daniel live in the dark, yet I was the one cast out, left to carry the shame alone. Still, beneath the grief, there was a steady flame. I knew what I had seen, and I knew the truth wasn't going to stay buried forever. If no one else believed me, I would find a way to make sure it couldn't be ignored. Being pushed out of my own family didn't stop the thoughts from circling in my mind. Every night I replayed the scene, the slap, the way people looked at me, and the smug expression on Sarah's face. The more I sat with it, the more I realized I couldn't just walk away. If no one was willing to listen, then I needed something that left no room for doubt. I started small. Sarah wasn't as careful as she thought she was. A phone bill arrived at my parents' house, and I managed to glance at it before Sarah grabbed it from the counter. Dozens of late-night calls to Michael's number stood out like a spotlight. I didn't take the paper, but I memorized what I saw. A week later, I caught a glimpse of her car parked outside a hotel, Michael's truck beside it. I circled back later and snapped a photo of them walking out together, both of them looking too comfortable for anything innocent. Piece by piece, I began to collect proof. Screenshots of messages, numbers logged, even a neighbor who had seen Michael's car pulling into Sarah's driveway when Daniel was working. Every detail added to the picture I already knew was true. I kept it all in a folder, tucked away like ammunition. When I finally confronted her again, it was late in the evening at her house. I laid out what I had gathered, certain that this time she would realize there was no use pretending. But instead of panic, she smirked. "No one's going to believe you," she said, her tone dripping with amusement. She leaned back against the counter like I was a child throwing a tantrum. "You're desperate for attention, Emily. You've always been jealous. And this is just another pathetic attempt to steal the spotlight." Her words stung more than I wanted to admit. I had come there armed with truth, and she twisted it into weakness like she always did. She even laughed as she pushed past me, muttering that I should give it up before I embarrassed myself further. I stood there shaking, gripping the folder so tightly the edges cut into my skin. For a moment, I thought about letting it all go, about burying the fight the way I had so many times before. But then I saw her smirk in my mind again, the same one she wore when she hit me in front of everyone. That was enough to harden my resolve. She might have the family on her side. She might have the crowd fooled. But the truth was in my hands now, and I wasn't about to let her walk away untouched. I swore right then that if she wanted to laugh at me, she would choke on that laughter when the truth finally came crashing down on her. It didn't take long before the foundation of their marriage began to shake. Daniel had always trusted Sarah without hesitation, but now small details started to catch his attention. Nights when she claimed to be with friends stretched later than usual. Stories she told didn't always line up with what others remembered. He didn't confront her at first, but the uneasiness showed in the way he watched her, in the pauses before he answered her question. Sarah noticed too. Instead of easing his doubts, she grew sharper. When he asked simple things, where she'd been, who she'd spoken with, she snapped back with accusations, twisting the conversation so he ended up apologizing. If he pressed, she burst into tears, insisting he was cruel for not trusting her. It was the same game she had played with me our whole lives, but now Daniel was the target. I knew he needed more than suspicions. Quietly, I began slipping hints in his path without attaching my name to them. A receipt tucked into an envelope, a photograph left where he'd find it, a printout of phone records that made no sense for a married woman. I never signed them, never explained. I wanted him to see the truth without being distracted by the story Sarah had spun about me. He didn't ignore it. He started talking to friends they both knew, asking if they had noticed anything off. At first, people hesitated, but once the question was raised, it was hard to dismiss. Whispers turned into private conversations, and soon the unease spread beyond their household. What had once been only my burden now lived in the minds of others too. Sarah, of course, caught on. She knew me too well to believe I had stayed silent out of defeat. One evening, she showed up at my place, her smile gone, her voice low and venomous. She didn't accuse me outright, but her words left no room for doubt. "If you don't stop meddling," she said, stepping close enough for me to smell her perfume, "I'll destroy you for good." Her threat hung heavy in the air after she left, but instead of scaring me off, it confirmed what I already believed. The cracks were spreading, and no matter how she tried to patch them, the whole thing was beginning to collapse. The breaking point came when Daniel finally decided he couldn't keep wondering. He reached out to me directly, his voice tired, stripped of the warmth he once carried. He asked me to meet him, Sarah, and Michael together. My hands shook when I agreed, knowing that this was the moment everything I'd been carrying would come to light. The four of us sat in Daniel's living room, the tension so thick it felt hard to breathe. He didn't waste time with small talk. Instead, he looked at me and asked me to show what I had. I pulled out the folder I had kept hidden for months, laying each piece on the table. Records of calls at strange hours, photographs that couldn't be explained away, messages that left no doubt about what was going on. One by one, the room grew heavier. Michael shifted in his seat, his face pale. Sarah tried to laugh it off at first, rolling her eyes, calling me dramatic. But the more Daniel pressed, the less convincing she sounded. When he turned to Michael and demanded the truth, silence stretched until Michael finally cracked. His words came out choked, but they were clear enough. He admitted what they had been doing, admitted that it wasn't just a mistake, but something that had been going on for longer than Daniel had ever guessed. The air erupted. Sarah leapt to her feet, her voice rising into a scream. She turned on me with fury, shouting insults, blaming me for destroying her marriage, insisting none of it would matter if I hadn't interfered. I didn't move, I didn't shout back. I just let her rage bounce off while the proof sat between us, undeniable and unshakable. Then came the voices of our parents. They rushed in on Sarah's side, calling me vindictive, saying I had always tried to undermine her. Their anger rang in my ears, but this time it didn't sting the same way. For once, Daniel wasn't looking at me like I was the problem. His gaze was locked on Sarah, his face hollow with betrayal. He didn't say much in that moment, only that the marriage couldn't continue. It wasn't immediate, but within a few months, the papers were signed, and Sarah was left standing in the ruins of the life she had built. No crowd, no gown, no adoring husband, just humiliation she had brought on herself. Even after everything came to light, my parents never wavered. In their eyes, I wasn't the daughter who had uncovered the truth. I was the reason Sarah's world collapsed. My mother repeated the same line over and over, that I had destroyed her eldest child's future. My father, quieter but just as firm, said that no matter what Sarah had done, airing it out was unforgivable. Every conversation with them turned into an accusation, every silence heavy with disappointment. It became clear that this wasn't just about the wedding or the affair. It had always been like this. They had protected Sarah from consequences all her life, smoothing over every lie, excusing every cruel word. I had mistaken that for favoritism when I was younger, but now I saw it for what it was, a pattern of enabling that let her grow into someone who thought she could do anything without fallout. The realization hit harder than I expected. I kept thinking about birthdays, family dinners, holidays, all the moments I once believed meant we were close. Looking back, those memories felt hollow, built on a foundation where I was tolerated rather than valued. Accepting that truth broke something in me. It felt like grieving a family that never really existed in the way I had hoped. In that darkness, one person refused to let me drown. Jessica, my roommate, noticed when I stopped eating, when I came home and sat in silence for hours. She didn't press for details at first, just left small comforts, a cup of tea, a warm blanket, a gentle knock on my door. Eventually, when I couldn't hold it in, she listened without judgment. I poured out everything, from childhood slights to the wedding disaster, and she never once made me feel crazy or cruel. She became the steady ground I needed. Where my parents dismissed me, Jessica reminded me that telling the truth wasn't wrong. Where my sister mocked me, Jessica reminded me of my worth. In her quiet way, she showed me what real support looked like, something I had spent years chasing in the wrong places. For the first time, I began to believe I could move forward, not by fixing the family that had failed me, but by building something new with people who chose me for who I was. Time has a way of pulling masks off, and Sarah's carefully crafted image didn't survive for long. Once Daniel filed the paperwork, the story spread quickly through their circle. People who once admired her began to distance themselves, no longer willing to ignore what they knew. Invitations stopped coming, whispers followed her wherever she went, and the admiration she thrived on dried up. What she had protected with anger and denial was now gone, replaced with suspicion and disdain. The end of her marriage sealed it. When the final papers were signed, Daniel didn't hide why it happened. At a gathering with mutual friends, he admitted he would have stayed in the dark if not for what I had brought forward. He didn't shower me with thanks, but the acknowledgement was enough. It lifted a weight I had carried for too long, proof that my voice hadn't been wasted. Meanwhile, Sarah tried to patch her world back together. She leaned harder on my parents, clinging to their sympathy, hoping their loyalty could shield her from the fallout. But instead of restoring her reputation, their defense of her only deepened the divide. People saw it for what it was, excuses and denial. The more they protected her, the more she appeared guilty, a woman exposed yet unwilling to own her mistakes. For me, the shift was slow but steady. With the burden of secrecy gone, I had room to breathe again. Work that once felt draining began to thrive, opportunities opening as if the cloud hanging over me had lifted. Friendships I thought were fragile grew stronger, built on honesty instead of fear. Even simple moments, laughing over dinner with Jessica, walking into the office without dread, felt like signs of a life finally moving in the right direction. It wasn't triumph in the loud, dramatic sense. There was no cheering, no spotlight. My revenge was quieter, watching her world unravel while mine grew steadier. I didn't have to raise my voice anymore. The truth had already done what her slap never could. It cleared the path for me to step forward, leaving her behind in the wreckage she created. Looking back now, the memory of that night no longer carries the same sting. For a long time, I could still feel the weight of every stare in that ballroom, the burn on my cheek, the way my parents turned their backs on me. But with distance, I see it differently. That slap wasn't power. It was desperation, the act of someone terrified of being exposed. She slapped me in front of 200 people to silence me. But in the end, the truth hit harder than her hand ever could. Sarah thought she could bury her mistakes beneath a smile and a pretty dress. Instead, she ended up standing in the ruins of her own choices. I didn't need to shout anymore, or defend myself to people unwilling to listen. Reality spoke for me, piece by piece, until even she couldn't pretend. Walking away from the family I grew up in wasn't easy. There were nights when the grief felt unbearable, when I wondered if I had done the right thing. But holding on to people who only valued me when I stayed quiet would have been worse. I finally understood that loyalty doesn't mean sacrificing yourself to someone else's lies. Now my life feels different, lighter, steadier. I've surrounded myself with people who actually choose me, not because they have to, but because they want to. Jessica is still by my side, along with a handful of friends who became closer than siblings. I've built something my old family never offered, a place where honesty isn't punished, where support doesn't come with conditions. As for Sarah, her downfall was her own making. Every attempt to humiliate me only set the stage for her undoing. She may never admit it, but I don't need her to. Watching her crumble under the weight of her own lies was the closure I never thought I'd get. The story didn't end with a perfect reconciliation, and maybe that's for the best. What I gained was stronger than the bond one lost. I walked away from the chaos, not empty, but free, ready to live the kind of life she could never take from me. Do you think I was right to walk away from my family, or should I have given them another chance? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell for more stories.